Okay, Millie, my dear, welcome to the Institute of Black Imagination.
Thank you so much. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. It's always such a joy and an experience and an entry into a portal talking to you.
Okay, let's enter the portal. But to start, who would you like to dedicate today's conversation to?
That's such a good question. I've never been asked that. My ancestors are fully here because 5 minutes before I had to come on this call, my niece and her partner are here and they're helping me pack. And they are very serious spirit beings. They are into wellness and health, and my niece cooks food and she gets recipes from her dreams, from our ancestors, and her work is about healing the body through food. And so she and her partner are very committed to that. And 5 minutes before this call, they said, because I've got an altar in my bedroom and they're helping me pack, and they said, Millie, we have to sit down. Someone is here. We have to acknowledge our ancestors. And so I sat down, I took them bepo, I took a candle, I took some snuff, and we just sat in my balcony now and called the ancestors. And because he was starting to feel something, he was like, I'm not okay, someone's here. And then she went down on her knees and she also was having heart palpitations, and she was like, someone's here, someone's here. Not in a bad way, not in a scared way. And so I was like, they said, come and help us. And so I came and I calmed everybody down and I called them in properly in kind of different incantations. And so this is literally 5 minutes ago. And this is why I was like, oh, I need to go fetch some pepper, because I can now feel the energy in this room. And usually when things like this happen, you know you're not alone. And so sometimes they will say the things that need to be said through you. And so we were marking time because I have to report that I'm leaving to the ancestors tonight before I go to sleep, because it's my last night here. But Usandiswa and Moachi, which is what their names are, they were like, we have to do it right now. And I was like, I can't, I'm going into this call. They were like, no, you have to do it now. And so I feel like I want to dedicate it to whichever ancestor is with us now. We don't know who it is, but there's someone here or a group. So, Kama Queen.
Okay. It's yours. It's yours. We give it up. So Millie, where are we having this conversation from? Where are you right now?
Right now, I am in my study, which is to be my former study in as of tomorrow, in Johannesburg, in a place called Hyde Park in Johannesburg, which is where I've been living for the last couple of years.
And just to orient the people who are listening, who is Milisuthando Bongela?
Somebody that I'm still also trying to discover and learn about. I am, gosh, it's an easy and a difficult question, because I'm very interested and concerned. I've always been concerned with defining myself first as a being, a spirit, then do part of my humanity, like the essence, the person that existed before I had a body and the person that will exist after I had a body. The decisions I made to come here with my parents and the lessons that, I was going to learn. So there's that person who is infinite, and who I'm also my physical self, with my brain and my psychological mind and my emotions and my body. I'm always trying to engage and hold. But I've always known since I was a very small child that I've always looked up. I've always looked and asked very big questions as a person. And I was never satisfied with the answers I was getting from the people around me. I've always been somebody who is, quite serious as a child, kind of happy by myself on the peripheries, which is where I always had a perspective in. I've always watched people, I've always observed, I've always taken notes, I've always written, I've always recorded, and I didn't know that this tendency is something that I've inherited from my father. So in Xhosa, we have this concept of ukufuza, which is something that you ufuza your talents or a particular, the way you laugh or the way you walk or some trait in your body and your being. You usually inherited from somebody. And so I remember a few years ago, I went to visit my aunts in the village and we were having like a family ritual that involved making traditional beer. And I remember we were cooking and I just took my phone and I placed it on the table. And I started recording the conversations, the stories, the way that they talk, which is just like precious. It's the most precious thing, language and all the universes that live inside language. And I remember one of my aunts said, "Hey, Kanti, don't lend your fuza," which is basically she was saying, but what of this thing of inheritance? Because she said, do you know that your father, years ago when we were all younger, way before you were born, your father used to do this exact same thing. He would walk into rooms where women are cooking, people are sitting down, and he would take out his black tape recorder, which had a bright red button, and he would put it in the middle of the table and press record. And I didn't know that my father had been doing this. And so this tendency to really want to capture detail, narratives, the timbre in people's voices, memories in this way is something that I think I've inherited. And it's led me to being somebody who's interested in history, in the secularity of time, in spirituality, in humor, in language. And I'm a storyteller. But first, I'm a story listener. And right now, I'm listening. When I listen to the stories, on one hand, there's just that beautiful human thing that we all do wherever we are in the world, which is to retell and to try to convey essences and ways of being, like who we are to each other. And on the other hand, I realized that I, in many ways, have signed up to be a story healer. Because the ways in which the stories we tell ourselves, inside this colonial construct and this apartheid construct that we mostly live in the world, this capitalist construct, the stories we tell ourselves, the way in which we talk about ourselves, while a lot of these things are true, the power of those stories and those narratives, they then begin to determine who we are before we can ask questions or before we can be curious. So I grew up in a home where I was never told that I'm Black, even though I'm Black and I'm in South Africa. And I'm in Africa and I'm growing up, I'm born at the height of apartheid. My parents never ever used any kind of identifier that, oh, you're Black, or you're this, or you're that. We were just Bantu, which is, the English translation is not people, because it's a type of person. It's a type of person that understands that we are physical bodies, but also we are very much connected to our ancestors, and we are connected to another entity we call Kamata or Nkulunkulu that we're not connected to. We don't have any business to do with what the West calls God. We don't know what God is. We don't know what entity. We don't know what gender. We don't know how. But we revere. There's this idea of Nkulunkulu, the great force of Kamata. I'm not sure what Kamata means. But we hardly talk about Kamata because what do we know? We don't know anything about a so-called God, But our ancestors are the ones that are in the gap. They're standing in the gap between us who are in this plane. And maybe they know a little bit better about what's on the other side because they are on the other side. And so we use them to engage elements of our lives and sometimes to send messages to this Ngulungulu. To maintain this relationship of, to pursue these questions of, I'm not even like wanting to, not wanting answers. Like I'm not really concerned with wanting answers necessarily because they don't really make a difference. I'm so sorry. You guys did such a good job of asking me to silence my phone, and then.
It's all good.
Please forgive me.
Forgiven.
Thank you. Yeah, like I've always wondered. I've been more interested in questions than the answers themselves, and so I have always asked questions as a child. Even now, I rely quite heavily on how to enter something difficult. Is like to ask a question. What am I supposed to learn here? What does this mean? Why has this happened? You know what I
You,
mean?
yeah, you have said so many things that I am just like reeling. I am going to do my best to circle back. One, this concept of curiosity. And what does it mean to lean into curiosity in the face of trauma, in the face of confusion, in the face of just wanting to know and releasing the need to know. You also said something that I found incredibly powerful around television, that's not, those aren't people, that's a type of people, and the ways in which media, and particularly Western media, really show a very thin sliver of humanity, even themselves. But what is really, I think, powering this prologue is really this idea of ancestors, ancestral power, and ancestral memory. In what ways do you engage the ancestors, your ancestors, in your daily life?
First of all, I love your interpretation of the television and whatever I said about people. I think I love the way you interpreted it, and I can go there with you. But I think what I was trying to say was that the way we refer to ourselves as Abantu in the place that I was born, for instance. We are part of the Bantu ethnic group in Southern Africa. But we are Xhosas, some of us are Mfengu, some of us are Baqas, some of us are Mahlubi. There's different nations within this idea of Abantu, or what Bantu people, which is kind of like saying people, because Bantu means people. And this idea of what it means to be, it's not just a people. It doesn't just mean people or person, because there's different types of people and we aren't all the same. But in our understanding of what a human being is not just the physical body that presents itself or that arrives at the time of conception or the time of birth. It includes the physical body, but it is also the spiritual. And so when you're talking about Umtu, you don't have a gap or an opportunity to question, oh, do they have a soul? Or it's assumed at the beginning when somebody arrives that there's a body, there's a soul, and when somebody dies, they don't die. There's no such thing as death, because people live in memory, but also ancestors continue to live. And I'm going to your question now, this idea of engaging the ancestors every day. And when a person is born and when a person dies, there are certain rituals to acknowledge, identify, engage them at the level of the spirit as well as the level of the physical. And so there are rituals that are done when a child is born. To say, a Xhosa child, for instance, or a Zulu child is born, to say to the ancestors, thank you so much for allowing this person to cross over from the other side. And depending on how the child was born, sometimes children who were born in a sack, where the amniotic sac didn't leave, they're called Abantwana Besinqobo, and they are known as, at birth, that this person will be a spiritual guide or a leader or a healer in some form. And so they're treated in very particular ways. Or sometimes a grandmother or the grandmothers will look and say, this person is returning at the time of birth, when the child is born. They'll say, oh, we identify this as so-and-so, uncle so-and-so, or the grandfather or some grandmother who died, who's now returning. And sometimes in some cultures here, the child will be given the name of that person, and the people who are grown-ups will call them father or mother, or uncle or aunt, even though they're a fresh baby. And this is to maintain, preserve this idea, this notion that you're not just born and then you die and then that's it. We choose sometimes the families we enter into. Maybe there's been a negotiation between the parents' ancestors that, two people might meet and fall in love and they might think it's just about them. And Gandhi, the ancestors of one family, they want to connect with the ancestors of another family or reconnect. And so they'll make you fall in love with somebody and then you'll get married. And marriage for us is not just about the two people necessarily. It's about the coming together of the families, the coming together of the ancestors. And if there's procreation, if there's children that are made from that, that child is then introduced to both sets of ancestors and is their responsibility. So this ritual called imbeleko is to say, thank you for bringing the child over safely. The child is now yours to take care of. You shall protect the child. You shall embalm the child in your care. You shall make sure the child doesn't get into accidents. You shall make sure that the child doesn't suffer and struggle in protect them. Make sure that they have intellectual ability and that they can travel and that their lives help them in their lives. So ancestors for us don't exist in the form of a family tree or in the historical sense only, where you're just like, oh, okay, there they are, I know what their names are. They are literally entities that are supposed to assist us with our lives. And so in that vein, we have to engage them too. So I grew up, I had this ritual done for me when I was a baby. And there's aspects of it that I've tucked into the film also, where I'm saying this I was introduced. And because of this, as a Xhosa child, I walk around the world knowing I'm not alone. Never am I alone. And this thing is not only something that's Xhosa people, that belongs to us only. I think that this has been part of human life throughout time all over the world. It's just that some cultures have thrown that thing away. Some cultures have destroyed it. Some cultures, it was taken away from them and the memory was erased. But generally speaking, I mean, I don't have a belief that anyone is ever wholly. This concept of being alone and isolated and individuated from things, I don't necessarily believe it, because I grew up in a home where whenever there was somebody to thank, you thank Ngulugulu, you thank God, you thank Jesus, but then you also thank your grandmother and your grandfather and your great-grandmother, and even those you don't know, you say, I may not know your names, but I know that you were there when I just almost got into that accident and then I didn't. Or something, I was in a car accident and I'm the only one that survived, or I passed really well at school, or all these mysterious, beautiful things that happen to us all day long as people, all the time, but sometimes we don't have anything to attribute it to. We can't say, some people are like, oh, thank God, or thank St. Anthony that I found this thing that I'd lost. But it's this culture of keeping this notion alive that we're not alone. And when there's time to thank somebody, you must thank the entities that protect you, your guides, your angels, etc. But Tina said, and you name this nyanya. You say, oh, thank you, Tata. Like, for instance, making the film, I know I was working with my ancestors. I know that my father was one very influential member of those ancestors, because he was a writer, and if he'd been allowed to make films, I'm sure he would have been a filmmaker too. And other ancestors from other parts of the world who colonized and maybe co-created people and spaces and land and time with our ancestors, who may owe a karmic debt to our ancestors if they killed them or if they took away their land. And so it wasn't just my ancestors that I was dealing with, because aren't we all dealing, if we go high enough, we don't know what's going on. And these people, they did things together that we don't know. But ultimately, the blood that courses through my veins, there's no such thing as pure blood. So it doesn't exist. And so it's not only the good ones that I get along with and it's my family and that I love. There's also other ancestors that I don't know, and that may have been violent, that may have been cruel, others that may have been traders passing through that had to do with my ancestors 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Others which come with particular gifts, because there's different categories of healers, and spirits. And so the way that it functions it's always functioned in that way in my home, whether when you're celebrating, you say thank you. When you're in crisis, you call upon the ancestors. Again, kind of reiterating this idea that we are not alone. You may think it's just you and your partner who are in crisis, or you and your child, or you and your family. But some people go to church. We go to the church too. Because we've imbued this name Jesus Christ with power, right? We've named Jesus Christ as, and so people, at least some people here, understand that as we imbue the name of Jesus with power. I'm not a Christian necessarily. I don't pray to Jesus Christ, but I'm curious about why does this entity keep strong and powerful? Why is it still powerful, even though we know all the facts that it came with the the Bible came with the colonizers to Africa, and we know the relationship that it has with you guys in the United States too. What is it about our people that still we are so connected to this name and this force? And someone said to me the other day, because I was like, I'm a bit curious, but I'm also a bit, obviously I'm skeptical. And she said, you know what? All these, you can attribute power to any object as a person. You can attribute sacredness to a piece of cloth that you wear on your head before you pray, or a stick, a walking stick, or we as the human beings have the power to say, this is now a sacred stick. And if everyone believes that this is a sacred stick, or what do they call them? Staff, a sacred staff, we will treat it with such sacredness. And we are the ones that are giving power through words, through language, which is a form of creation. It's through incantation, through prayer. And if you imbue that inanimate object with a certain quality of, oh, this is sacred, it must be respected, not everybody can touch it and step over it and whatever, then we are the ones that give the thing power. We are the ones that are determining and naming. And so what this woman said to me, who's a friend of mine, was that's her relationship with Jesus. She doesn't necessarily buy into what's been said verbatim, through Christianity, but her understanding is that this entity is forceful because we give it power. And if it means that I must say thank you, Jesus, when I've gotten a raise, what am I losing as a person? Because I'm also saying thank you, ancestors, thank you, Gulu Gulu, thank you, nature, thank you, trees. You know what I mean? There's a very fluid relationship with these unknown, entities. And so to answer your question, sorry, succinctly, I'm very bad at being succinct. I talk to my ancestors. And it's very important to vocalize. It's not just about sitting quietly and being like, no. And obviously I'm respectful. There are particular daily small rituals like lighting a candle, putting water there, making sure there's mbeko, making sure there's tobacco. And certain candles mean certain things. And again, that's a fusion with Christianity, because there were some ancestors who were Christians, some of them who were priests. And so when they transcend, they become ancestors in the African sense, but also they don't necessarily lose. Maybe they have the gift of prayer or something. They don't lose that quality. And so you invite that part of themselves too. And so, yeah, I talk to them, I engage them, I ask them for help, I thank them, and no subject is off limits. Everything can be said there because it's me and my relationship with them. They know all my secrets. And everybody in my life, or the question, whether it's like about work, whether it's about relationships, whether it's about family dynamics. Sometimes, I remember one time my sister and I were having some trouble with our mother, and my mother could not hear us. We were trying to, get her to do something very important for the family, and she was just like refusing. And I said to her, don't worry, let's talk to Makulu, who is my grandmother, my mother's mother, who died in 1959. I've never even met her. But you can sit down at your altar. I was in Johannesburg, my sister was in PE, Gqeberha, which is in the Eastern Cape. And we both sat down and we said, let's talk to grandma and ask her to open the ears of our mother so that our mother can hear what we need to say to her. So sometimes you can even do that. You can even, if I'm fighting with you, I don't have to talk to you. If I've been introduced to you, I can say, yo, tell this dude to listen. And that's literally what happened that morning. Like, no, not that morning, the next morning. I got home and my mother was like, okay, fine, let's sit. Let me hear you out. Let's talk about this thing. And she took such incredible action that we were like, oh my God, we couldn't. That was the first time I knew, but there's a lot of power in the maintaining of these relationships. And it's such a gift, and I'm so grateful. And I know that my work in the world is to talk about this.
So, Millie, there's so much that you said. I just want to kind of ground like the audience in like all of the things, right? So we've spoken about ancestors. We've spoken about kind of rituals, technologies that you use. And we will talk about South Africa and apartheid and the Transkei and your film. But, you know, we had an earlier conversation where you spoke about technology and technologies. And you've also spent time in the U.S. And how long were you here in the U.S.? Like you went back and forth for a period of time.
Yes, I've been going back and forth to the U.S. The first time was 2010, but from 2017 onwards, I've been really going back and forth to very many parts of the country. Yeah.
And, you know, coming from this history and tradition, you know, in South Africa and in your village, you know, and then let's go back to 2010. You encounter America and Black Americans. What did you witness? You know, what did you recognize? And what did you see had been lost after those 400 years?
A very big question. In 2010, I was very young. I was, I think, in my early 20s, and I was coming to New York to work in a fashion related institution. And I was bright-eyed and so excited to come. And, you know, the funniest thing about New Yorkers and New York and African Americans in New York was that the television was not very wrong. Like in terms of the accents, first of all, the accent and how people talk was wild. I was like, oh my God, they sound like, I feel like I'm in TV. So sometimes in the morning, I would wake up and hear people out the window and some guy would be like really loud and saying something like to his friend or whatever, shouting across the street. And I'd be like, oh my God, I feel like I'm inside the television. And it was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. That spark, that beauty, that magic, that thing that African Americans convey from a distance through this medium of television and even magazines like Jet and Ebony and stuff, which we were reading in South Africa at the time. Something about that had been captured. Something about who African Americans are was reflected back in that moment. And I know there are deeply problematic representations of Black people in that country to you guys, but to the rest of us, really and truly to hear an African American accent in real life at that time was a trip. And it's not something you can ever say loudly there. You can't be like, oh my God. But back home, I was like, oh my God, guys, they really do sound, you know, like these characters that you see, you know. I was like, oh, it was quite fascinating. And I really enjoyed that. And I saw the pain of America too, because of course we sold this beautiful, magical, the narratives of the country work very hard in the world. And through this cultural imperialism, sitcoms, music videos, you know, and especially in the 90s, it was very successful. They were very good. We were enamored. People are enamored by what America has said about itself and its people, the stories. And so on one hand, I could touch that thing that excites the rest of us in the world. And on the other, I was pretty shocked to see that. I remember going down the subway. It was snowing. It was really cold, and I remember seeing a mother pulling a pram or a stroller, struggling with a stroller down the lift at 7 a.m. with her baby, and it was a black mother in Harlem. And I was just like, this is hard. Like, this is hard. It's cold. And she had other children that were with her that were going to school. And something in the story and the narratives and the propaganda that were sold, something broke in that moment when I was just like, life doesn't have to be this hard. Everything kind of does feel like a struggle in New York, where basic things that in other places you don't have to struggle for, you don't have to feel like you got to kill yourself to get. Like, you don't have to have 3 jobs in other places. Having one job is pretty sufficient to help you live. That thing was broken in that first trip. And as I returned to the country more and more, I began to really enter into, not that I could ever feel the exact experiences of African Americans, I really began to feel the pain of this group of people who were brought to this place that has never, ever, ever given them the feeling of what is home. I took it for granted. I know what home is. I know where my ancestors are. I know I can go to the gravesites and talk to them. And it's warm, and I've always been welcome. There's just a knowing. It's like somebody who has a present dad who's always there helping them with homework and coming to fix even when they're 45 years old, their father's still there coming to fix something in their house. There's a little confidence that you have in life when your parents, you can rely on them. And I felt the pain of what must it be like to be in a country that has always actually just hated you, and a place that actually just doesn't want you, and to not have this feeling of pure security in life, like a feeling of safety. And of course, we know the triumphs and the utter brilliance is as true as the pain of African Americans. The utter brilliance, I don't know what to call it. I think the word magic is too weak, actually. The word magic is too weak. It doesn't really capture the thing. And so the more I came, I began to see with both of my eyes. On one hand, I could see the brilliance, and on the other, I could really see the pain. I was always wondering, why am I here? Why have I come to this country? What have I come to do? Why am I being shown Utah? Why am I being shown Nevada? Why am I being shown South Carolina? Why? And I'd go to the most random places and almost study. Eventually I was like, let me study this country. Let me just observe and learn and take it as if it was my own. Not in the, imperial or colonial sense, not in that, like, I want to own it. But someone said to me when I was a bit irritated that I keep being sent to America, to these strange places, she said, the world is yours, the whole world. This idea that you only belong to a particular small part. Open that up, the whole world belongs to you. And so I also returned to that country with that narrative of, like, what would it mean if we started to speak differently about the separation, this great, painful separation, where Africans were taken to the so-called New World in North America, as well as South America, as well as Central America. What if we were to inquire about this event, this process, this tragedy, this thing that happened, from this curiosity to what end? Why did that part of the world need Africans? Why did some of us want to go? Why did some of us not arrive? And to ask these questions, I'm sure, obviously, there are many people who have asked this, but to continue to ask the questions from a spiritual perspective, how do we understand this? How do we enter it? How do we engage it? How do we read it? Because the ways in which we understand it are so frustrating because we don't understand it and it doesn't take away the pain, you know? And so in more recent times, and I was with an African-American guy for 3 years. I dated a man who was born in Alabama and he moved to Florida and he ended up in Virginia. And so I met him in Virginia, and he happens to live very close to the site where the first enslaved Africans from Angola were sent in 1619. They were intercepted. They were on their way to, I think, England, and they were intercepted by another ship that then took them to outside Richmond, Virginia. I forget what it's called, the exact place. Hampton. Yeah, that's what it's called. And I said to myself, why have I found myself here now? Why am I here now in this particular site? And I came in 2019, so it was this massive exhibition in Richmond, Virginia. And the 1619 project, was launching there because that is the site, right? Where the first enslaved Africans end up. And I remember on Christmas Day in 2021, we took a trip there and sat and spent the morning, and I took Mpepo because I fly with it too. We went to the various sites and we burnt Mpepo, we sat down, we talked, and a year before that, I'd begun to have dreams. When I was visiting him, I would have these dreams of old African-American people, young African-American people. One time I dreamt of an old woman who was wearing a bright yellow dress, and she was sitting in her small kitchen by the door, and she had glasses on, black glasses on. And she was blind, and she was old. She was over 90, maybe close to 100. And I don't know what she was doing, but she was at the door, and I woke up and I wrote it down, and he was sleeping next to me, and I told him that I had just, and she was not African. She was not African like Xhosa or Zulu, like my people. She was an African American, and I didn't understand. And in that same holiday, I dreamt of another lady who was much younger. She was about 40, 41, and she was with a 5-year-old child, and they were in an empty church. And again, I woke up and I said, who are these people? And much later on in our relationship, did I learn that through a consultation with a healer, that with him, that some of these people were his ancestors. And so that question of what bonds us and all the ways in which we are still bonded, actually, not bonded in the jailed sense, but connected, it became irrefutable. And I knew that something in the work that I have to do in this life is about going back and forth over this ocean, back and forth from this side to the other side, and listening for ancestrally, what's being said from the other side about now? What must we ask? What must we do? As well as what do we need to heal? Because we've retained those technologies in South Africa, even though they were illegal, and there was something called the Witchcraft Suppression Act because they thought our religion was witchcraft. And so all these technologies went underground or were suppressed and people became Christians. There's a revival that's happening in the last, I'd say, decade, where young people are we're done. We're calling it back. We're saying our ancestors are rising through us. People are going through, not converting, it's called the Twasa, which is basically being initiated into the healing practices, whether they like it or not. And it's when the ancestors call you to say, Wena, you must come and heal the people physically, mentally, through art. Some of them are medical doctors, but then they become initiated into Isintu and to become Izangoma or Amatecha, and then they have to integrate Western healing systems with African healing systems. We're there now. We're just there. And so the questions I began to ask is, what does it mean that also so many of us now are allowed to go to America and Americans are allowed to come here? Black people. What does it mean that there's nothing stopping us now from, except money sometimes, obviously, but a lot of us are going back and forth. To what end? yes, it's like exciting to see each other and to connect and to talk about the books and the albums and the jazz and the art, all these wonderful things. We must never stop. However, the question of the spirit and the ancestral, my thing is, I'm busy here in South Africa with work that involves engaging the ancestors because they also want to be healed. How do you rest in peace if you've died violently? Can you rest in peace as a spirit? And so I'm involved with some people here where we are reconciling ourselves with our ancestors because we carry their wounds in our bodies and they carry our wounds too, vestiges of them in their spirits. And so there's this very intentional work that's happening on this side of the world. That's always been happening, but now it's kind of happening more freely and with less fear, where we are engaging in the work of healing our ancestors using these technologies. Incantation, prayer, the voice, water, blood, seed, word, this these ancient traditions that human beings have had that Africans have preserved. And so going back and forth, I said, what does it mean for African Americans to also be involved in this? How do we have conversations together? Because we know that our collective ancestors, our shared ancestors died in that country, on that land, and in that continent, North, Middle, and South, very, very painfully, in the most horrific ways. And what does it mean that there's also the knowledge has been severed? Of course, there are people in that country who are having these conversations, who are writing, who are healing, who are doing rituals, who are doing wonderful things. But I think the knowledge can always be supported and grown and widened. I know that my friends who are there don't know these things. So what does it mean that we're friends? How do we let our friendship... Sometimes, we think we're getting along because it's nice and we're cute and we both like art and we both like history and we both like film. It's cute and I like that. But at a very deep spiritual level, I'm also like, okay, cool. What's happening here and how do we share this stuff? And so even now when I come there, the places that I'm being sent to, I say, oh, okay. Here, I can't just come empty-handed. I can't just come with my shoes on without the reverence of being like, I landed up by mistake. We landed up at the place where the first African burial sites in Richmond. By mistake, I didn't know. And I was like, it's not a mistake. There's no such thing as a mistake. It's not a mistake. How did I end up here with these questions that I have? And so again, we sat down, we took the paper out, we talked to the ancestors, and we said, thank you for guiding us to this place. How can we help? What do you need? And can you help us help? This idea of healing them, because so many died in such horrific ways, and we don't know their names, we don't know their stories. I was listening to This American Life on Monday, and there are ghost stories. There are tours in that country where, in the South, in places like Savannah, Georgia, where people have these ghost tours where they tell ghost stories about enslaved people. And some of the stories are made up and people are profiting. White people are profiting from making up stories about dead black people, making them ghost tours.
Millie, I have this. So let's, okay. All right.
I'm sorry, let's breathe.
So, circling back to the movie, right? So you have created a film that was in Sundance, is so powerful and so beautiful, that speaks about your upbringing and your life back in South Africa. And something I was so interested in this conversation, and something that, I told you earlier, that, even as a curious, hyper hyper questioning, we have this in common, right? Like wanting to record, wanting to share narratives, record narratives. But even in all of that, I never heard of the Transkei.
Mm-hmm.
The Transkei. And for listeners who are listening in, we are speaking about a somewhat, sort of, kind of independent nation that sat within South Africa during apartheid. And in the movie, you have this really beautiful phrase where you talk about living inside of apartheid's wish. You were actually living within this space. So, me being curious and, just out here in these streets, and even the team, literally none of us had heard of the Transkei. Could you explain to us what the Transkei is? And you grew up in this space, not even knowing that you were there in apartheid.
Fascinating. It was fascinating. This was the question of the film. This was a question I was always asking in these last 8 years of making this documentary. What was the Transkei? Because it's not simple. So basically, the apartheid regime, apartheid starts in 1948, and it started by a group of white South Africans called the Afrikaners, who are a little bit different from British white South Africans or, British white South Africans, in that their origin story, the origin stories are, it seeks to fulfill this notion that they force this concept of indigeneity, that they are not Europeans. They might have come from Europe, their ancestors might have come from Europe, but they are Africans, they are part of the soil, but not Africans like me and you. They are Europeans, but they have forced indigeneity in Africa, and they have created a new identity, which to some degree is true, because Afrikanerness and Afrikanerdom is an offshoot of a bunch of European identities. And so, as part of kind of legitimizing this idea, they start apartheid in 1948, this idea that we will create our own country, we will not be the laughingstock of Europe, we will not be the laughingstock of the United States, we want to be taken seriously. Let's create the system that creates a white homeland in Africa. And that says you cannot dispute that there's a white homeland in Africa. And this is happening in the period as African independence is happening in the rest of the continent, as there's the great European flight at the rest of the continent. They're like, we're not leaving. Our ancestors have been here for 400 years. And they were under the British, because the British colonized everybody. And there's always been a tussle between the white South Africans. There's the Afrikaner side, and then there's the ones who still have two passports, British passports and South African passports, because that umbilical cord was never quite broken between Europe and South Africa for British citizens and sometimes French citizens, etc. So in this project they say, let's create apartheid, this notion that we want to actually have a white homeland, but in apartheid literally means every nation, every ethnic group should be apart. People should not be mixing. People were mixing. That's why they created it. People naturally, human beings, the country was already, some 300 years old at the time when apartheid started. South Africa, the former country that we know now, even though we had been here for thousands of years. The indigenous Khoi and San people were here for thousands of years before that. And so they create apartheid with the intention to create separate little nations. So there's going to be the white homeland, of which 87% of it is going to be, 87% of South Africa's land mass is going to belong to the smallest group, which are the white people. And the Zulu people are one nation. The Xhosa people are one nation. The Tswana people are one nation. Pedi, Tsonga, etc. And the whole point was that we're going to balkanize the country, and each little group is going to have their own separate country. And so they started this process in the 1960s, but of course it was rubbished by everybody because everyone could see right through it. And the point was that they want to treat black people in their South Africa very badly, so that black people will want to run away and go to their nations, their homelands, as if with people that have always just stayed in one place and never roamed around. And so the Transkei comes out of this idea of apartheid. It's created by the white government, by the apartheid government. It's conceptualized by them. And everyone's rubbishing it. Nelson Mandela rubbishes it. Steve Biko, all these well-known activists are like, this is a terrible idea. We see what you're doing. And one man who happens to be Nelson Mandela's relative, I think it's Nelson Mandela's nephew, a name named K.D. Matanzima, from the 1960s, says, me and my people, I'm tired of living in these shitty conditions under apartheid. I'm going to buy into this idea of actually, fine, give us our own land. And Americans, the apartheid government had also, I think, studied the reservation system in America. This idea of like, oh, let's just give them their own land so that they can run their own affairs and they don't have to bother us with what they need. And let's give them the semblance of leaders and independence. And so Umatanzima says, actually, I'm going to take this ticket because we're tired of being treated badly by you guys. And actually, let's buy into this notion of separatism. And so in 1976, Transkei becomes so-called independent. And it separates from the rest of South Africa, installs these leaders, and these leaders are out to build a Xhosa nationalist nation that where white people don't have all the rights, where it's Xhosa people that have the rights and the land and jobs. And so, of course, the whole world is fighting about this. They're saying it doesn't exist. The only country that recognizes the Transkei is Israel. And Israel and the South African government are the only countries in the whole world. It's not recognized by the UN, but it's recognized by these two countries because they're working with the Transkei. So the apartheid government funds and pumps money into this idea of the Transkei. And essentially, all the accoutrements of a state, they print all kinds of things. There's flags, there's Independence Days. So the South Africans come down to have a Transkei Independence Day. And the people of the Transkei are also sold with this idea that, look, aren't you tired of living under these whites who abuse you? And the people are like, of course. And the people of the leaders, they are like, yes, well, maybe we should have our own country. And people like my parents buy into it. And they say, yeah, actually, we don't want to live in some shitty conditions. Let's buy into this new country. And if you were educated, of which many Transkeians were, if you were middle class, of which many Transkeians became middle class because there was a lot of the white people left who were doing the civil jobs, police, clerks, secretaries, nurses. They left the country and moved to South Africa. Some of them remained. They were like, we're not leaving, and they were allowed to stay. But the rules were, it's going to be you're not going to be treated special. You're not going to be special here. And so I did grow up with white people, but I didn't know they were white. My sister says, because I used to think we didn't. And my sister was like, they live next door to us, which wasn't happening in South Africa during apartheid. But white people didn't have this thing of being superior or better. I had no conception of that. And so I wasn't taught about race. And my mother, when I asked her, what did you guys think of South Africa? Obviously, you knew this stuff was happening. They were like, we used to read about this in the papers. And so, wow, things are so bad in South Africa. Meanwhile, yesterday you were South Africa. But they just created this new country. And so it was a shock to discover that I've grown up in this place, because when it ended, as apartheid ended, it disappeared. The flags disappeared, the official dim disappeared, the passports, everything that had the makings of a state disappeared. But I remembered, wow, wait a minute, we grew up watching cartoons in Xhosa. We grew up watching TV shows in Xhosa. English was something that was optional. You went to study it at school, but it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to study English because it's better. I learned how to read on books that my father wrote in Xhosa. And so the tension is that I did have this sort of idyllic childhood. There were many other people in the Transkei who didn't, who were poor because classism. It was a very classist place. But in terms of this idea that there's something wrong with me and I'm black and I'm in pain and I've got a tragedy and a trauma, that idea is just, I discovered that when I was 9 years old in a white school. but I didn't know that I'm Black. I didn't know that that we have traumas because I'm growing up in this very colorful world. And what the Transkei government had done was also take this narrative of African independence and also communicate themselves like we're also a new independent nation. Even though the world was like, you're not. This is a sham that's been created by these like apartheid people. And you see in the film, the leader of the Transkei says, our independence is an essential element of South Africa's policy of apartheid. And so in the film, I'm like, opening the question, what was apartheid? Did we really understand what it was? The images that we grew up watching and that you guys were seeing in the United States and everybody else in the world, does it match the complexity of what it actually was on the ground? I feel like in the anti-apartheid struggle, those narratives were very important to show the worst versions of it, to show how brutal it was, to show the teeth of apartheid. Really, it was necessary. That's how we got our freedom. However, now that I'm 37 years old, right, and it's been almost 30 years that we've had our so-called democracy, and all the vestiges of apartheid and colonialism and slavery are here. They have not gone anywhere. The traumas, the crises, the people, our people are so broken on such fundamental levels, and we don't even know how to talk about it. We don't know where to start. And so I was like, I want to go back to ask, what was apartheid? Do we really understand what it was? If such a place as the Transkei can exist, because 1 year after the Transkei got its independence, another state popped up called Bophuthatswana in 1977. And the leader there was like, look what Matanzima is doing. Those people are lagered off and they're not struggling like we are. Let's also build one. And the apartheid regime was like, great, our plan is coming true. And they rushed off to Bophuthatswana, did the same thing, made flags, made stamps, made songs, and pumped money into this idea. And then after that, another one in 1979, Venda was like, us too, in another part of the country. And then in 81, another one, Transkei. So these little states, they were called the TBVC states. Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda, Transkei started forming, where you now had ethnic groups and these leaders who were Xhosa nationalists and Zulu nationalists and Venda nationalists who didn't really care, because the whole plan of their regime was to divide and conquer the Black people and make sure that the Zulus don't trust the Xhosas, make sure that the Xhosas don't trust the Tswanas or the Sutus. Because if we come together, which is what was happening in the ANC, for instance, and the PAC, where Black people are like, doesn't matter, we're all Black, we're all getting treated the same. But in these lagered zones, which a lot of propaganda was being fed to the people there, life seemed okay. Life seemed fine. So, but it wasn't, of course, because the complexity is that it was, yes, I may have had some kind of nice Pan-African childhood, growing up with Ghanaians and Ugandans and like going to dashikis at birthday parties and never knowing being traumatized by whiteness and white supremacy every day. However, this was the creation of the regime, because the whole idea was about land, actually. It's about they want to take the biggest land, develop it for themselves, and create a white homeland. So first they create Black homelands. They're never going to say we want to create a white homeland. They called our areas, oh, here's your Zulu homeland, here's your Xhosa homeland. But the bigger picture was it is creating a white homeland. That was actually the point of apartheid, I think. To naturalize this idea that white people belong here. Sorry.
Oh, no. So, like, in this kind of discovery of what you were growing up in, even now, right, even as recent as 2018, like, what are the difficult questions we should be asking about power, fear, intimacy, and love as it relates to race? And to maybe center it, in your film, you say, I have to be very careful about how I remember my memories. I have to ask dangerous questions.
Yes.
What are those dangerous questions?
Dangerous questions were, at the time, can I claim to be Black in South Africa if I grew up in a place like the Transkei? Can I claim the struggle of Black South Africans? Do I belong in that group if actually I belong to this other group? Why do we not talk about this other group? Why do I feel ashamed that I belong to this other group of Black people who didn't suffer as much, or who were in this other weird place? And the most dangerous, most difficult question was, not a question, but a realization was, what if it's possible for white people not to have known that apartheid was wrong? Because I grew up in a place not knowing I'm inside of it, not reading them. I don't realize the propaganda. Like, is there a universe in which we can say maybe some people didn't know? Because here I was, not knowing that I'm in apartheid, not knowing that I'm Black, not knowing that anything is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can extend that question to myself, the scary thing was, can I extend this question to white people in South Africa?
Mm-hmm.
And that was very scary to enter into, because I had to go into that space. I had to say, if they use propaganda towards us in the Transkei, of course they must have used propaganda here too. Not to absolve anybody, not to say, oh, they didn't know and they were all innocent and the propaganda was just brainwashing them. However, what was the power of propaganda and how did it create our reality? Why is it that a minority group can control us for 340 years? How? What do you have to do to people in order to let that happen? What do we have to believe about ourselves? And so I had to get out of the unnuanced, so-called radical terms of understanding what Blackness is, of understanding what apartheid was, of understanding what oppression is and what power looks like and how power functions. I had to get into understanding or exploring who are we when we are not invulnerable, when we're not protesting in the streets being strong, with our fists raised, with our beautiful speeches and our rousing leaders. Who are we on the normal day? And why is it that we capitulate so much in front of white people? How does that happen? At which point? What age does it start? Which age do I start to believe that I'm inferior? Genuinely, in my brain is developed around this idea that whenever a white person walks into a room, they can have authority over me, and I buy into that. How does that happen? How does the white person at 3 years old know exactly who to look at when somebody says, oh, there goes the N-word, there goes the K-word in South Africa? How come the white child at 3 years old knows, oh, they're talking about this person who looks like this, not me? How? So psychologically speaking, how does racism exist? How does it start? What is the... not the big stuff, not the loud stuff, not the stuff that we all recognize. I was more interested in the psychic wound and how it passes itself on silently between us, how it constantly exists in this country, where a Black person and a white person, there's a smile between them in a park, a smile between a stranger who's Black, one who's white, is loaded. And we weren't talking about this in our country. We were talking about people who went into jail and people who fought. And I'm like, many of us didn't fight, guys. Many people didn't fight. Many people, not to scorn anyone, because they were scared, because there were consequences when you were trying to fight, right? You would die. You would be disappeared. So fear, this idea, we're always, a lot of the times, what I was seeing reflected back to me was like, a Blackness that was always very confident. We're not scared. We can just tell you. And I was like, yes, I know this. And I'm trying to make contact with that feeling. But what about the fact that I am scared of white people? I am. And I'm not scared of the police. I'm not, because the police are gone. The white police are gone in our country, in Joburg. You see Black policemen. I'm not scared of the police. I'm not scared of the soldiers. I'm not scared of a monster, a big guy who's like scary and like a wild racist. I'm scared of the ones who are sitting next to me at the restaurant. I'm scared of the ones in my classroom. I'm scared of the ones who are my neighbors. Because inside those intimacies, there's like a close range harm that happens there, where they say one little girl says something to you that you will never forget for the rest of your life about your blackness, about your ability, about your competence, about your intelligence, about your home, about your food, whatever, all this shit. Like, and that thing stays with you, and it has the capacity to cripple your humanity. I'm more interested in that thing, in like, how does this happen? How do our mothers work in these kitchens with people who treat them all kinds of ways? How? Where does that thing live in the mind? Is it always there? Do they compartmentalize and go, okay, I'm going to work now? And, I'm interested in how we carry this stuff. And then what does power and fear and intimacy, what's happening in that space? And then what is love in that space? Is it possible? What is love for myself? Can I identify what love is for myself when there's a huge part of me that has hated the way I've looked? Because I've grown up in a world that has convinced me that I'm ugly because I'm black. Not I'm ugly because of my facial features, but because of the skin, because of my physical attributes of being an African. There's a part of me that believes that I mustn't pretend that we didn't just arrive at like this point now where we're like natural hair and ruby woo and nice big buns. Like, we're on a journey, but I want to talk to the part of us that did believe those things, and not to shame it and not to say it was wrong or whatever, because it was wrong, but like, we had no choice. And I think in the last 15 years, we've done such good work in like silencing, like in dethroning that truth, because it was a truth for our parents and our grandparents. We've done a good job through the internet together all over the world of like really being like, this is bullshit, our lips are fine, etc. However, it doesn't mean just because you intellectually believe that, that the rest of you believes that.
I mean, to do this film, so, there's, in many ways, you have just kind of channeled, which is incredible. But, our relationship, right, is one that was also predestined, right? I met you in 2016 in Joburg, and somehow, somewhere, I knew you were my wife in some regard, whether or not you wanted to own that or not.
I am your person.
Oh, thank you, darling.
I am. I own
it. I do. She says I do. But there were moments where you disappeared, because when I met you, like, you are so full of life and joy and beauty and wisdom and intelligence and just chic, like, you just have it. Like, you get like, it's kind of annoying.
Thank you.
Actually.
Oh my gosh.
It gets on my nerves. But then you kind of disappeared. Oh, hey. But you kind of then disappeared for a second. You kind of stepped away from social media. I think from a kind of a public space, right? You were quite public. You were writing articles and journals. You were, working in fashion. You spoke a lot about, traveling back and forth to the United States. But like, my access and the world's access to you had to be removed. And I'm very interested to know why and what that space allowed for. And I could prompt it because this is something that I see happen many times, right? Particularly with Black women and Black women in the public. Lauryn Hill stepped away. Michaela Cole, the writer, stepped away. And she even has this quote, and this can maybe help center us. And out of this disappearance, right, comes this movie. But what she says, write the tale that scares you, that makes you feel uncertain, that is uncomfortable. I dare you. In a world that entices us to browse through the lives of others to help us better determine how we feel about ourselves and to, in turn, feel the need to be constantly visible visibility these days seems to somehow equate to success. Do not be afraid to disappear from it, from us, for a while, and see what comes to you in the silence. So, why did you step away, and what came to you in the silence?
I mean, Michaela says it all, I think. I know that I couldn't do both. Couldn't be on social media, saying things in public, writing, being public facing, and listen. Because it wasn't just about having the silence, it's about listening to what is inside the silence. And that for me meant sacrificing and letting go of a lot. You know, my public facing identity was one thing, but I sacrificed a lot of friendships, a lot of time with my family, a lot of ways in which I was relating with the world. Because I felt there was a noise in my mind. It was like a thing that couldn't stop going like this. It was like a bell. Imagine a very loud cowbell that's ringing in your head, and you're trying to get to a room where you're just like, I can't hear cars, I can't hear trucks, I can't hear birds, I can't hear all these other things, because I'm trying to listen for what exactly is this ringing sound in my head, which won't stop, no matter what I do. And it was almost as if it wasn't a choice. I wasn't like, okay, guys, it wasn't a choice. It was almost like a calling. You know, when a calling calls you, you don't have a choice but to respond. And so the way that I've tried to describe it to my friends was that it felt like there was this loud ringing bell in my head, and it was only going to stop when I've completed this thing that I've here to say. And people would notice it and they'd say, yay, which is, I mean, I don't know the exact meaning of that, but the meaning that I've heard people say is it's when you have a calling, and it's when you have got this bone that you will not let go of until you extract the particular flavor and taste that you need for you to live. And I knew that it wasn't about whatever it is that I'm going to say. It's not for me. It's for the world. It's working with me. It's an entity that's working with me that needs me to retreat, that needs me to be quiet, that needs me to not turn on social media because it's nice there. It's so nice and so distracting. And if I'm gonna see you doing cool things and fabulous things, and I'm gonna see somebody else doing cool, fabulous things, it's gonna make me doubt. There's already a lot of doubt in the path of the light. There's already a lot of doubt and a lot of self and of ego death that has to happen. And so I was busy, man. Damn, I was busy. Oh my God, I was underground. I really did go underground. I went into myself so deeply with such force. And I know I wasn't the only one that was pushing. I worked with incredible people, two incredible people in particular, my editor, Henkel Lee, and my producer, Marion Isaacs. Like, we really went into the underground of ourselves as people to listen to the film, to what it wanted. Because we knew quite early on that, oh, it's not just a nice story that's journalistic and, you know, only intellectual. We knew that, oh, there's something here that has called us. And we are in service to it, and it needs our collaboration. I'm not a vessel. It's not some powerful thing on its own. Its entity and my body are 50-50 there. We have to work together. So we are collaborating, and it was really a process of listening and going deeper and deeper. And on a superficial level, I would say like it was working out, going backwards from like having really bad ideas to like distilling them to good ideas. And I had to accept, I had to learn at each stage. It took me almost 9 years to make this film. And today, as I was packing my clothes today, I'm reading my journals from 2014, and I'm like, wow, how lovely it is to graduate from your lesser good ideas. But how wonderful it is that you had them, you know? And I knew I was never satisfied. And because I knew about it's not saying It's not the voice of the film. It's not the face of the film. It's not the spirit of the film. And as soon as we knew that we were working with another spirit, that's how we approached. That was our process. And so that really required, it was a state of prayer a lot of the times, and meditation and poetry and uncertainty. We just had to dive deep into uncertainty, which is what life is, isn't it? And faith is, isn't it? It's the point that there's no certainty. And so how do you lean into that thing? And I feel like anything outside of that, even some of my friendships, even some of my work relationships, even normal life felt like it was oppositional to what I was trying to do. And so I did retreat, really and truly. I didn't fight with anyone. My friends, I said to them, I'm sorry guys, you will see me every now and then. And I made my group much smaller. And I would only see certain people at certain times. And at times I would try out my ideas. And sometimes I would see that this thing that I'm trying to say, I'm not saying it correctly, but it's not landing with my friends. And then they would make me doubt. Not they, but the fact that it's not landing, they would make me doubt. I'm like, oh, am I saying the right thing? And I was like, I can't be in a space of doubt right now. So I said to my friends, please excuse me. Because I have to go like this. I've got to put my ear right to the ground so that I can understand the harmony of this ringing in my head. And that's what art is, right? That's what that's what art is in the world to us. This is the gift that it gives us. It helps us to access this world, these entities, to talk to these conscious entities that are always trying to help us and tell us stuff, but we must come correct. And so this was a process of me trying to figure out what does it mean to come correct. And don't think that I wasn't trying to be on Instagram. Oh, please, I tried. Don't think I didn't try to go out and be on Twitter, whatever. I was still trying, and it was nice. I couldn't even watch all the shows that everybody was talking about. The last show I watched was Game of Thrones Season 2. After that, I have no idea what's happened, because even when I was watching other films and other series, because a series, I commit in. I dream about the characters, they become part of me. And I knew even that was toxic to the process. I couldn't meet all these beautiful characters from, what shows did I miss, for instance, that everybody was talking about? Watchmen, for instance. I wanted to watch, everyone was like, oh my God, the show's so good. I wanted to watch these shows and engage, but I knew I can't afford it because it's going to infiltrate and it's going to make me doubt myself, because I'm insecure, right? I'm an insecure writer and an artist, and I'm like trying to be like, does this thing make sense from me? I'm insecure on many levels. And so I was like, how do I eliminate all the things that make me doubt myself? And so if I saw a brilliant show somewhere else, I'd be like, God damn it, I can't forget about that writer. Damn. And then I would, the only thing, I couldn't even read new books. Because again, same problem. I'm gonna get sucked. I could only read nonfiction that was about what I'm doing. I was doing research, right? But I couldn't dive into other stories because they were threatening and they were too dangerous to my process. Because if they were good, then I'm gonna start to want to sound like that writer. But I had to figure out what does it mean to sound like me. And so it was all or nothing. And so at some point I was like, yeah, I'll give up the books. I'll give up the TV shows. I'll give up Instagram. I'll give up social media. I'll give up knowing what's going on in Dario's life, even though I absolutely adore him. But I know that the second I see his eyes again, our love has never stopped. Even though I didn't talk to you for 4 years. And that's exactly what happened, right? I called you after 4 years and we picked up right where we left off. And it's been like that. My true friends, this is how it's been. No one pressured me. No one was like, Mimi, no one. Somehow people understood and they respected, and I really am very grateful to even my family. They never asked too many questions. They just knew about, this child, just let her do what she's doing. And I think we owe ourselves that. A lot of us owe ourselves that thing to dive into, to commit, and it's hard. It is the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It's the most challenging thing, and it's scary, and oh my God, I'm in therapy twice a week. because of this. And I'm so glad to have that support, because you can't do it when you're really facing. A lot of our process is about facing oneself, facing history, facing archive, facing the shit that has happened that you can't just gloss over. Like, I was like, I really want to understand this. And so that's also where the curiosity had to come in, because sometimes it was too painful to engage the stuff. And so I had to drop my own, I had to try as much as possible to be objective, which is almost impossible. But I had to be like, okay, if I'm to really understand how apartheid happened, I can't enter with my own feelings of like, these people were 1000% evil. I'm never going to understand it. I'm just going to lead with that. So how do I take away my own feelings and try to understand what happened so that it doesn't, so that I can understand it so that it doesn't happen again. And yeah, and it was like a philosophical, historical, psychological, spiritual intersection, all four at all times: psychological, historical, philosophical, spiritual.
And you may not have the answer to this, and I'm not really looking for an answer as much as a vessel to hold this question in that work, and in releasing or at least decoupling yourself from the identities that you walked into this work with. Do you feel that apartheid was as damaging as the world narrative suggests? And to maybe narrow in the reason why I'm being very deliberate with my word choice is because your film and even your life history and story shows ways in which it allowed for a sense of personhood and a belonging to take place out of sheer ignorance of the larger structure at work. And in the US, we had segregation as well. And of course, the Black areas were completely underfunded and subpar and all of these things. But we at times have a conversation around what does it mean? What did it mean to have our own schools, to show up in class and have a teacher that actually cared whether or not you got the lesson or not, and to fight to reinsert ourselves into an intimate space with people who mean us harm?
Oh my God, this question. I don't think apartheid gave me and gave the people who had a different experience of it in the homelands those lives. I think we gave ourselves those lives. Our parents gave ourselves those lives. And even in those places in segregated America, people give themselves the quality lives that they, in those spaces. It's not like I don't want to walk into this dangerous zone of being like, oh yeah, maybe apartheid was justifiable in this particular way. I think that it is more evil and more complex than we understand. I think that the understanding is actually maybe still at 40%. We're not fully there. We understand it in material terms. We understand it in masculinist, violent terms. So we understand it in practical, tangible terms. But psychologically, that is the most damaging thing, to cripple so many millions of people, indigenous people all over the world, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, in all these other ways that you can't see and touch, to break them, not just their arms, but their spirits, is far more damaging. And I feel like even in a free South Africa, where I live in a beautiful apartment and I drive a Mini Cooper and I speak this English and I'm traveling and getting on planes, what is the pain inside of me? It's not material. It's historical. It's ancestral. It's intangible. It's the stuff that we can't see. And I think a lot of the times we are attracted to this notion of only needing things to express themselves materially to see how bad it is. We know that it's bad, but I feel like it is far more complex than we understand it. The fact that this was intentionally planned, they didn't have good intentions and love when they were putting black people and luggering them into those places. This was the most unarable land. They chose the best land for themselves. And they were like, oh, it had no minerals. It had no wealth. So it wasn't like these plans were set up intentionally because there was a care. It came out of greed. It came out of this fundamental notion that is anti-human, this idea of separating people. Fascism says we must be separated. We must create straight, hard, rock-solid lines and separate from each other, separate families, separate. And that's why our pain as Africans and black people all over the world is that they separated our families. We haven't even begun to talk that much about what is the intergenerational damage of that. The fact that a lot of us have no idea what it's like to have the support of two parents and our larger, not just two parents, because this nuclear parent notion is bullshit. Communities that were thriving, where people were concerned with just how to be a human being. And seeing in a far wider way. And so, like, I think that when we understand and think of apartheid only in the vile senses of the people getting shot down the street and the policemen wielding guns, this is what makes white people buy into this idea that it's over. We're not doing that anymore. You guys aren't being shot at by, water cannons and stuff, because we have only attached apartheid to this, the most grotesque form of the physical expression of it, the material expression of it. No, before something is material, it starts off as an idea. It starts off as a belief. And the belief is the thing that makes one build their whole life around it. The belief is the thing that ends up being a pointed gun at you if you're a black person by a policeman. And so that territory of thinking and ideology, that is far more sinister and evil. And I feel like this is where our attention should really be. This is where the healing can only happen if we go there. Because yes, we don't have to wear plasters because we're not getting physically grazed as much as we were 100 years ago. But shit is still broken. People are in so much pain. And to buy into this idea of the material as security or the material as the most important thing is to buy into the reasons that made the Europeans go out into the whole planet and do this. And to kill all the other forms of life that we know are true, to attach ourselves only to this idea of our physical selves and only the things we can see and touch and prove. This is the problem. Life is far wider than that. It's far more complex. It's far more mysterious. It's far more bigger. And I don't even think we're not even at 50% of understanding how evil apartheid was.
Mm-hmm.
But inside of that evil, the people of the Transkei, Matanzima, for instance, is always painted as like a puppet and a sellout. And yes, one could actually argue that from the outside. But when you listen to his speeches, of which I've listened to every single one of them, because I've been researching this for years, it wasn't a sense of, oh, we're capitulating because the white people told us. They're like, no, we are self-determining people. We want to get on with the program of living. And if it means we've got to take this shitty ticket, we'll take it. But inside of that, fortunately and unfortunately, the program of living continued. There was living that happened, as you know, and as you are relating to the experience of what happens, because he says in the film, when we are put together, they don't treat us with respect. But once we are separated, they will see that we are men from another state. And of course, whether this sentiment was true or not, or real or not to him, it did create something that wasn't the typical experience of apartheid. And I don't want to play the game of saying either or, of choosing, whether it was good or bad. It's complex because history and life is complex. And so the thing about the film is that I'm trying to articulate this position of coming from this place that I don't necessarily agree with ideologically, but that's given me so much. It's given me my life. It's given me my language. It's given me my religion. I belong somewhere, I feel like this idea of belonging is like I'm set in that regard. And so I can't discard it. And it's about living in the grayness of the whole thing, right? And unpacking apartheid not from this perspective of like arriving at the door of it and saying it's evil and that's it. Or arriving at the door of the Transkei and saying this was good and that's it. It's about that's why it was so successful, because it was created by psychologists, by the way. The people who conceived of apartheid was a group of psychologists in Stellenbosch, one of whom became the prime minister. And so it uses the qualities of life and the human complexity and the complexity of and the abstractness of the mind, and perverts that for the causes of fascism. And ultimately, it's fundamentally and diametrically opposed to Ubuntu, Isintu, to the indigenous knowledge systems here that most indigenous people understand, which is that we need each other. There is no such thing as an individual. I cannot live by myself. I don't bring myself into the world. I don't bury myself. I don't live alone. I need other people as a human child, or I die, right? We need each other. We are part of a complex system, and we fathom, as a human being, I'm fathoming myself through you right now. I can't look in the mirror and for the rest, if I were to sit and look at the mirror for the rest of my life, I would never know myself. I would never know myself. I would just see how I look. But I know myself by having a conversation with you. I know myself, another part of myself, by having a conversation with my mom, another part by having a conversation with my dog or my therapist. And this is why I was saying at the beginning that my spirit and all of our spirits are infinite, because we're not having the same conversation with these different people. One part of me comes out when I'm talking to my mom, another part when I'm talking to my uncle, another part when I'm talking to my partner. And this is the at the heart of Ubuntu. It's not a man is a man because of another man or whatever. It means we fathom life and existence by interpersonal conversations. Whereas the other thing, fascism and apartheid, which is what it is, says I am an individual, and we must separate as much as we can. That's why intimacy is then the antidote to fascism. All fascisms, right? As it relates to queerness, as it relates to religion, as it relates to all the ways in which we are split. And so the way to undo that is to insist on intimacy. I don't know if I've gone off too much, but fascism is the antidote. Intimacy is the antidote to fascism, and so that's why in our fight against apartheid, we have to figure out how do we not do the work of apartheid for it. So when we say, I understand there are moments where we need to preserve ourselves and we need to separate. When we need to say, as Black people, this is ours. This is ours. Let's be alone now. But or as women, cis women, let's be alone. Trans women, let's be alone. Because only in our own spaces can we understand how we sound and how our pain is and how our joy is. However, we cannot stay in that position. We have to, otherwise that's doing apartheid's work for it. It's like, oh, you want to be alone? Great, because you are making this idea of ours live, right? And because it's not going to racism is not going to be resolved by Black people sitting alone together. Nor is it going to be resolved by white people sitting alone together. There are times when everybody has to be in their own group, but we have to figure out what is this very difficult center where we do have to meet. In that center, what are we saying to each other? How are we speaking? How are we breaking down the trauma? How are we breaking down the aggressions? How are we breaking down all this other stuff? And then this other desire to be together, because it's there. And this other desire for love to exist. And we are owed so much love, Dario. We are owed so much love. I mean, I don't want to say white people must leave me alone anymore. There was many years where I was like, leave me alone. Now I'm like, actually, at the very, 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 very bottom of this feeling of leave me alone is a cry that says, why have you not loved me back? You're supposed to love me back because I've loved you. My mother has loved you. I've loved you. We've loved you for 500 years. Why do you not love me back? And that why doesn't come from a place of I need it because no, it's a human right to be loved. A child enters into the world and the first thing they expect is love because they deserve it. And so if it's been systemically taken away from us, our stance to say leave us alone and we just want to do our own thing. I understand it. That's a response of like, you've hurt me too much and I don't want to be around you. But it doesn't take away the need for that love because we're humans. That's why we get shocked when people treat us badly and follow us in the restaurants or in the pharmacy. That's why we get shocked because that thing is the thing that's saying, you're supposed to love me, actually. Why aren't you loving me? But because that language or that thing is like, it seems like it's a soft language. It's not soft. It's the most profound. I'm very interested in it. I'm not good at it yet, but I'm very much drawn to this idea that I'm done now being like, leave me alone. I'm like, oh, because we are also shamed when we want to go closer to them, right? We're always shamed when you want to go closer to the other that has harmed you. But that thing that lives inside you that does want to go closer, it's not something, I don't want to be ashamed of it anymore. It's the natural thing because I'm here to love. Animals, plants, people, life. And that requires intimacy. And we are scared of it. I'm in therapy because I'm scared of it. In my own family, in my own life, I don't have a partner because I'm just like, oh my God, as soon as somebody comes close, it's too scary. They're going to leave me. They're going to hurt me. But I'm unlearning that. And of course, how our stances against whatever the other is in our life, it's mirrored there by our relationships intimately. Whatever's happening in the politics outside, however our stance is to other people outside, it's going to be mirrored there in your relationship. You can't have violence and horror and hatred outside and think inside you're going to have nice love. No, it doesn't work like that. You can get married in the NG Kerk, you can get married in the Baptist church or the Church of Lutheran, what. But is there love in that thing if you're living in a violent society? No. And so, yeah.
Wow. Well, my dear,
Oh my God, it's been 2 hours. I'm so sorry.
No, I think that is an incredibly powerful place to wrap this iteration of our ongoing conversation. I thought about so much as you were speaking, about, and here we speak a lot about design, as a technology to bring thought into space and time. And so, realizing that the materiality of a gun in one's hand started long before a gun arrived in the hand, right? That the world's spaces, social constructs, even media, culture, the spectacle, right? The materiality of it is just the residue.
Mm-hmm.
It's the residue of a much, much more powerful energy force. This idea of apartheid and this kind of puppet state, in a way, of the Transkei makes me think of the multiple levels of apartheid that exist, right? Both globally,
Mm-hmm.
all the way down to oneself, right? There is a global apartheid, right? There are states that exist that are not really states.
Yeah.
They just have the appearance of statehood,
Mm-hmm.
as the Transkei did. That the notion of individuality is a microcosmic apartheid, because you are saying that I also separate myself, right? In this notion of my own material acquisition and selfhood, I am actually separating myself. I am creating my
Yeah.
own state, my own apartheid state against the world, right? Or against the other,
Yeah.
not in relation to, even though we can't help but be in relation to, right? Like the
Yeah.
truth will always be the truth, but
Yeah.
mentally, right? And so much of what drives the self, the individualism, is material acquisition. I remember I have a diamond on my ear, and it's a lab grown diamond. And
Oh, I didn't know they made
yeah.
such.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It's amazing. It's a company called Vray, which is French for real, VRAI. Anywho, but what I loved about it was like, oh my God, I don't have to release the aesthetic, right? Like I love this aesthetic, I love the beauty, but
Yeah.
nobody had to die
Yeah.
for me to enjoy it, and it made me think about how sinister the desire for this material manifestation of palace, of park, of
Yeah.
jewels, of cars, of whatever. Like what like how many humans we're willing to throw under the bus in order to enjoy a shiny object.
Yeah.
And and we all, right? What do they say at the end of Romeo and Juliet? All are punished,
Mm.
right?
And
We're
that
all
punishment is
here.
loneliness.
Ah,
The loneliness we're feeling as a result.
yeah. So anyway, Millie, this has been incredible. Um,
Thank you so much.
Ancestor, whoever you were in the room, thank you for showing up. These conversations, we always have a slight roadmap, and then you kind of also just have to let, what we would say in the Baptist tradition, the Lord have his way.
Yeah. The Lord certainly does have his way. I get that. It's true. It's true.
And so, Millie, I just want to, before I ask my last question, I just want to take this moment to acknowledge you, to acknowledge the work that you have put into the world to carry those stories forward and to trouble the water, to trouble the water, to trouble the many waters that we've traversed over and that we reside in, and even those that we offer in sacrifice. And so I want to thank you. I know that work. I mean, baby, I'm my Instagram account was was down for 3 weeks, and I made it, but it was tough. So I know that work of 4 years is tough, but to know what it means to just kind of shut it down and shut it off so that you can actually hear is such a gift. And thank you for sharing that with us, because I really believe that we're so used to it. It's in the soup of life that we don't realize how distracted we are, how cut off we are from what is trying to come through us. And we hear it and we snuff it out, right? We silence it. We put a pillow over it with binge watching or IG or a dating app or what we think is love. And that great work is the work of listening to what's already there. And so I just want to thank you for doing that deep listening, like listening beyond space and time, to even make this conversation possible. So, Millie, thank you.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. Oh my God. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for always seeing me, Dario. I see you too.
And so, Millie, what is the world you imagine for the future?
I'm so excited about the future. Oh my God. It's literally, I sometimes overthink about it. Like, not overthink, but I'm just always there. Sometimes I'm like, maybe come back. Because I remember one day having an argument with my then boyfriend, who said that all the great leaders are dead. Never ever will this world ever see another Gandhi or another Mandela. And I became so angry because I said to him, maybe all the great male leaders of the world are dead. But there's no way that death can be declared without us, without me having a shot at it. Greatness. Us who've been in the cupboards, locked up, not allowed to come out and be ourselves. And we are coming out hard and fast, and it's glorious. And so, despite and in spite of every ways in which we have been snuffed out and they have tried to snuff us out, this idea that we cannot participate in a future because the one that we know now, the life that we know, life as we know it is dying. Yes, it must die. We are in deep mourning because all the ways that used to make sense about the world, we are in free fall from that. It is dying. And I don't want to go with the wave. I feel the pain. We all feel the pain of the loss. We know certainty is being lost. There's so much that we don't know. All forms of security are, going out the window. And this is painful, and it must be mourned, and it sucks on one hand. However, other new things are being born. We are doing a lot better in terms of what it means to take care of ourselves and this idea of gesturing towards care for self, another, the planet, than we ever have. The consciousness that we have about the rest of the world and how people live in different parts of the world. 200 years ago, people didn't know what was going on at the other side of the world. And so I feel like as the world is dying in many, many ways, and it has to die, happy birthday, babes, to all the new things that are coming. Happy birthday to us. Happy birthday to our kids. We are going to be the best ancestors because we're conscious of that stuff. And we're like, yes, we're reclaiming it. We're making it I'm so happy to be alive. Every day I'm like, I cannot believe I'm here. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And so there are ways to read what's happening as crisis because it is for the antiquated ways of being, for the ways of being that have to die so that we can bring new ones. We've got to give away some of these things that we've been holding on to. as I move my apartment and let go of some stuff. Because there's a South African saying that you can't get anything with your hands closed. You got to open your hands, then you'll be in a stance to receive. And so I feel like we really need to tap into the narrative of like arrival, like we've appeared. I don't think we are born. I think we appear. It's like, oh, we've appeared, and now, because we were never gone, right? Even the birth, being born means it makes you think as if like you were disappeared. No, you were always there. You just appeared this time, and you're like, hey, I'm back. And so, I don't know. I just think all these questions that we can now ask on public platforms, this conversation that we can have now that we couldn't have 50 years ago. I don't feel afraid of like, in a fundamental way. I mean, yes, I'm scared of like, making a mistake and saying the wrong thing on the internet being cancelled. but every day I don't live with an energy of fear, and that's because I'm working on that. And it's wonderful to live in a world where that's possible and we can share technologies and ways to do it, and we aren't being stopped. And we're here, And this is a miracle, Dario. Yeah. We're continuing a very old tradition here of South Africans and Americans having conversations in this way. It's a very old tradition. The fact that we can do this talk now, and I'm coming there next week to stay at your place. Hello. Like, this is an old tradition, and it's wonderful that we can take some of these things from the past with us, but also really determine other futures for ourselves, which are where liberation is not just freedom. I don't just want freedom, I want true liberation. Mm-hmm. And for us to sit down and be like, have a 5-hour conversation, what is liberation? As spirits, as not in a woo-woo way, but like in a real way, like that embodies and encompasses all these things. I feel very fortunate to be alive, and I'm not the only one. There's many of us, and I'm glad I came again this time.
Absolutely,
very happy.
Well, Millie, what ways, if people can, what ways can they connect with you? Where can they get an opportunity to catch a screening of this film? I don't know if you have IG again, but maybe Twitter, maybe email,
I do.
Maybe a website, maybe just a website.
Well, people can click on the bottom of this button and subscribe to my YouTube. I'm just kidding. I don't have a YouTube. But I love when the influencers do that. So I'm on Instagram, Miss Millie B, MISSMILLIB. And I'm also on Twitter, same handle. People can email me at info@milisuthando.com. And I'm not interested in TikTok, unfortunately. I'm too old. Like, I think it's the young people's thing, and there's nothing in me that says I want to go there, but I enjoy seeing them sometimes. And right now we are doing the festival run of the film. So I'll be in New York on the 6th and 7th of April. We have a screening at the Museum of Modern Art in a festival called New Directors, New Films. It's not a festival, it's more like a program that Molema has. And so there'll be a screening on the 6th of April there at the Walter Reed Theatre at the Lincoln Center, and on the 7th of April at MoMA. And then, when is this coming out? Because some of these are not allowed to announce yet.
This will be coming out at the end of May, but we will put a link in the show notes to your site and the movie site, and people can find it there.
Wonderful.
Millie,
but we're also going to other parts of the country and the world, which will be great.
Okay, work. Thank you, Millie. This is incredible.
Thank you so much.
I love this idea of apartheid as representative of an existential lie. There is no separation between us. What are your thoughts? Head over to Instagram and Twitter at Black Imagination and share with us your favorite moment on today's episode. Oh, and can I ask you a favor? leave us a review over on Apple Podcast and share this episode with a friend. Okay, all right, that was 2 favors. Be sure to check out this conversation and others at blackimagination.com, and you can now watch this and other episodes on our new YouTube channel, the Institute of Black Imagination. Now, come close. Let me tell you a secret. There is no separation. All is consciousness. The thoughts in your head occupy the same space as that glass on the table. Simply observe them and move on. Stay curious and keep dreaming.